Hi, I'm Joey Haber from the Flying Tortoise Academy in Portland, Oregon, and welcome to another morning workout. Today we're going to go over some ShuiJiao hip and leg opening exercises, a bit of Bagua hips and back opening, and a whole lot of my teacher Zhang Shuiyan's Bagua line drills. Hope you enjoy it.
Had lost interest in Red Coast. The first change was reducing the base's security rating. The consensus was that the extreme secrecy around Red Coast was unnecessary, and the security detail at the base was reduced from a company to a squad, until eventually only a group of 5 security guards were left. Also, after that renovation, although Red Coast remained administratively within the 2nd Artillery Corps, management of its scientific activities was turned over to the Chinese Academy of Sciences Astronomy Institute, and it took on some research projects that had nothing to do with the search for extraterrestrial intelligence or the military. I believe you achieved most of your scientific accomplishments during that time. Initially, Red Coast also took on some radio astronomy projects. At the time, it was the largest radio telescope in the country. Later, as other radio astronomy observatories were built, Red Coast's research turned to the observation and analysis of solar electromagnetic activity. For this, they added a solar telescope. The mathematical model we built for solar electromagnetic activity was at the forefront of the field back then, and had many practical applications. With these later research results, the large amount invested in Red Coast had at least a little return. Actually, much of the credit should be given to Commissar Lei. Of course, he had his own agenda. He realized that as a political officer in a technical unit, his future wasn't bright. Before joining the army, he had studied astrophysics as well, so he wanted to return to doing science. The research projects that Red Coast took on outside the search for extraterrestrial intelligence were all due to his efforts. I doubt that he could have returned to technical work so easily after spending so much time as a political commissar. Back then, you still hadn't been politically rehabilitated. It looks to me like all he did was to put his name on your research results. Yeah, smiled forgivingly. Without Lei, Red Coast Base would have been finished even earlier. After Red Coast was designated for conversion to civilian use, the military basically abandoned it. Eventually, the Chinese Academy of Sciences couldn't maintain the funds necessary for Red Coast's operation, and it was shut down. Yeah, didn't talk much about her daily life at Red Coast Base, and Wong didn't ask. 4 years after entering the base, she married young Weining. Everything just happened naturally, without any drama. Later, an accident at the base killed both Yang and Lei, and Yang Dong was born after her father's death. The mother and daughter only left Radar Peak in the mid-80s, when Red Coast Base was finally decommissioned. Yeah, later returned to Tsinghua, her alma mater, to teach astrophysics until retirement. All this Wong had heard from Sha Rushan at the Miyun Radio Astronomy Observatory. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is a unique discipline. It has a profound influence on the researcher's perspective on life. Yeah, spoke in a drawn-out voice, as though telling stories to a child. In the dead of the night, I could hear in my headphones the lifeless noise of the universe. The noise was faint, but constant, more eternal than the stars. Sometimes I thought it sounded like the endless winter winds of the greater Qinghai Mountains. I felt so cold then, and the loneliness was indescribable. From time to time, I would gaze up at the stars after a night shift and think that they looked like a glowing desert. And I myself was a poor child abandoned in the desert. I thought that life was truly an accident among accidents in the universe. The universe was an empty palace, and humankind the only ant in the entire palace. This kind of thinking infused the second half of my life with a conflicted mentality. Sometimes I thought life was precious, and everything was so important. but other times I thought humans were insignificant and nothing was worthwhile. Anyway, my life passed day after day, accompanied by this strange feeling. Before I knew it, I was old. Wang wanted to comfort this old woman who had devoted her life to a lonely but great enterprise. But Ye's last speech caused him to sink into the same sorrowful mood. He found that he had nothing to say except, "Professor Ye, someday I'll go with you to visit the ruins of Red Coast Base." Ye slowly shook her head. "Xiao Wang, I'm not like you. I'm getting on in years, and my health isn't what it used to be. It's hard to predict the future. I live my life day to day." Looking at the silvery head of hair on Ye Wenxie, Wang knew she was thinking of her daughter again. 15. Three Body, Copernicus, Universal Football, and Tri-Solar Day. After leaving Ye's home, Wang Miao couldn't calm down. The events of the last 2 days and the history of Red Coast, two seemingly unconnected strands, now twisted together, made the world unfamiliar overnight. Once he was home, in order to escape this mood, Wang turned on the computer, put on the V-suit, and logged on to Three Body for the third time. The attempt to adjust his state of mind worked. By the time the login screen appeared, Wang seemed like a different person, one filled with an unexplainable excitement. Unlike the first 2 times, this time Wang came with a purpose. He was going to reveal the secret of the world of Three Body. He created a new login ID appropriate for his new role, Copernicus. Once logged in, Wang again stood on that broad, desolate plain, facing the strange dawn of the world of Three Body. A colossal pyramid appeared in the east, but right away Wang knew it was no longer the pyramid of King Zhou of Shang, or Mozi. It had a Gothic-style apex, stabbing straight into the morning sky, recalling St. Joseph's Church at Wangfuzing. But if that church were placed next to this pyramid, it would be nothing more than an entrance booth. He saw many buildings in the distance that were apparently dehydratories, but also now built in the Gothic style, with tall, sharp steeples, as though the ground had grown numerous spikes. Wang saw a door on the side of the pyramid, lit from within by flickering lights. He walked over. Inside the tunnel was a row of statues of the gods of Olympus holding up torches, their surfaces blackened by smoke. He entered the great hall and saw that it was even dimmer than the entrance tunnel. 2 silver candelabra on top of a long marble table provided a drowsy light. Several men were seated around the table. The dim light allowed Wang to see only the outlines of their faces. Their eyes were hidden in the shadows of their deep eye sockets, but Wang could still feel their gazes focusing on him. The men seemed to be dressed in medieval robes. On closer examination, 1 or 2 of them had simpler robes, more like classical Greek chitons. At one end of the table was a thin, tall man. The golden crown on top of his head was the only thing that glittered in the great hall, other than the candles. With some effort, Wang saw by the dim candlelight that his robe was different from the others. It was red. Wang realized that the game displayed a distinct world for each player. This world, based on the European High Middle Ages, was chosen by the software based on his ID.
"You're late. The meeting has been going on for a while,"
the gold-crowned, red-robed man said.
"I'm Pope Gregory."
Wang tried to recall what little he knew of European history in the Middle Ages, so that he could deduce the level of advancement of this civilization based on the name. But then he remembered how wildly anachronistic historical references could be in the world of Three Body, and decided the effort wasn't worth it. "I'm Aristotle. You changed your ID, but we all recognize you. In the previous 2 civilizations, you traveled to the east." The speaker was the man with the Greek chiton. He had a head of white distance, one by extreme cold, another by a blazing sun. I also saw the great efforts the scholars of the East expended in trying to master the laws governing the sun's motion. Ha! The sound came from a man with a goatee that curled upward. He was even thinner than the Pope. Eastern scholars tried to understand the secrets of the sun's motion through meditation, epiphany, or even dreams. Utterly laughable.
This is Galileo,
said Aristotle. He advocates understanding the world through observation and experiment. He is an unimaginative thinker, but his results demand our attention. Mach also conducted experiments and observation, Wang said. Galileo snorted. Mach's way of thinking was still Eastern. He was nothing more than a mystic dressed as a scientist. He never took his own observation data seriously, and he constructed his model based on subjective speculation. Ridiculous. I feel sorry for his refined equipment. We're different. Based on large amounts of observational data and experiments, we make strict, logical deductions to build a model of the universe. Then we go back to experimentation and observation to test it.
That's correct.
Wang nodded. That's also my way of thinking.
Have you brought a calendar as well, then?
The Pope's tone was mocking. I don't have a calendar. I only brought a model built upon observation data. But I must make it clear that even if the model is correct, it's not certain that by using it one can master the precise details of the sun's motion and create a calendar. However, it's a necessary step. A few lonely claps echoed throughout the great hall. The applause came from Galileo. Excellent, Copernicus. Excellent. Your pragmatic way of thinking, adapted to the experimental scientific approach, is lacking in most scholars. Based on this alone, your theory is worth listening to. The Pope nodded at Wang.
Go ahead.
After calming himself and walking to the other end of the long table, Wang said, It's actually pretty simple. The reason why the sun's motion seems patternless is because our world has 3 suns. Under the influence of their mutually perturbing gravitational attraction, their movements are unpredictable. The 3-body problem. When our planet revolves around one of the suns in a stable orbit, that's a stable era. When one or more of the other suns move within a certain distance,
Right hip,
their
external
gravitational
rotation.
pull will snatch the planet away from the sun it's orbiting, causing it to wander unstably through the gravitational fields of the 3 suns. That's a chaotic era. After an uncertain amount of time, our planet is once again pulled into a temporary orbit and another stable era begins. This is a football game at the scale of the universe. The players are the 3 suns, and our planet is the football. A few hollow laughs rang out in the great hall.
Burn him to death.
The Pope said impassively. The 2 soldiers standing at the door in rusty armor started toward Wang like 2 clumsy robots. Burn him, Galileo sighed. I had hopes for you, but you're nothing more than another mystic or warlock. Such men are a public nuisance, Aristotle agreed. At least let me finish. Wang shoved away the iron gauntlets of the 2 soldiers.
Change directions.
Have you seen 3 suns, or know anyone who has? Galileo asked. Everyone has seen them. Then, other than the sun that appears during chaotic eras and stable eras, where are the other 2? The sun that we see at different times may not be the same. It's only one of the 3 suns. When the other 2 are far away, they look like flying stars. You lack basic scientific training, Galileo said, shaking his head. The sun must move continuously to a distant spot. It cannot jump over the intervening space. According to your hypothesis, there should be another observable situation. The sun must get smaller than it usually appears, but bigger than a flying star, and gradually shrink into a flying star as it moves farther away.
But we've never seen the sun behave that way.
Since you have scientific training, you ought to have some knowledge of the sun's structure.
Figure eights.
That's my proudest discovery. The sun is made of a sparse but expansive gaseous outer layer and a dense and hot inner core.
Very true,
Said Wang.
but you apparently haven't discovered the special optical interaction between the sun's gaseous outer layer and our planet's atmosphere. It's a phenomenon akin to polarization or destructive interference. As a result, when we view the sun from within our atmosphere and it gets a certain distance from us, the gaseous outer layer suddenly becomes completely transparent and invisible, and all we can see is its bright inner core. The sun then appears to be only the size of the inner core, a flying star. This phenomenon has confused every researcher and every civilization throughout history and prevented them from discovering the existence of the three suns. Now you understand why the appearance of three flying stars heralds a long period of extreme cold, because all three suns are far away.
A brief silence followed as everyone pondered this.
Right leg, internal
Aristotle was
rotation.
the first to speak.
You lack basic training in logic. It's true that we can sometimes see three flying stars, and that's always accompanied by destructive periods of extreme cold. But based on your theory, we should also sometimes see three normal-sized suns in the sky. This has never happened. In all the records of all the civilizations, this has never occurred.
Wait! A man wearing a strangely shaped hat and a long beard stood up and spoke for the first time. I'm Leonardo da Vinci. There may be such historical records. One civilization saw two suns and was immediately destroyed by their combined heat, but the record was very vague. We're talking about three suns, not two.
Left
Galileo
leg,
shouted.
internal rotation.
According to his theory, three suns must appear sometime, just like three flying stars.
Three suns have appeared,
Wang said, utterly calm.
and people have seen them. But those who saw such a great sight could not leave behind any information about them, because seeing three suns would mean that they had at most a few seconds left to live. They had no chance to escape or survive. Trisolar days are the most terrifying catastrophes for our world. On such days, the surface of the planet would turn into a smelting furnace in a second, and the heat would be enough to melt rocks. After the destruction caused by a trisolar day, an eon would pass before the reappearance of life and civilization. This is yet another reason why there's no historical record of them. Silence.
Internal rotation,
Everyone
figure
stared
eight.
at the Pope.
Burn him.
The Pope said gently. The smile on his face was a little familiar to Wang. The smile of King Zhou of Shang. The great hall came alive, and everyone seemed to be preparing for a celebration. Galileo and some others joyfully carried a stake out of a dark corner. They pulled off the charcoal black body still tied to the stake and cast it aside before fastening it in an upright position. Another group happily piled firewood around the stake. Only Leonardo ignored the commotion. He sat at the table, pondering, and occasionally using a pen to calculate something on the table.
Giordano Bruno.
Aristotle said, pointing at the blackened body.
Like you, he came here and spewed nonsense.
Use a low fire, the Pope said, his voice weak. Two soldiers started to tie Wang Miao to the stake using asbestos ropes. Wang used the hand that was still free to point at the Pope.
You are nothing more than a program. As for the rest of you, you're either programs or idiots. I will log back on.
You cannot return. You will disappear forever from the world of three-body. Galileo cackled.
Then you must be a program. A normal person person would certainly understand the basics of the internet. The most the game can do is record my Mac address. I can just switch computers and create a new ID. I'll announce myself when I'm back.
The system has recorded your retinal scan through the V-suit, Leonardo said, looking up at Wang. Then he returned to his calculations. Wang Miao was seized by a nameless terror. He shouted,
"Don't do this! Let me go! I'm telling the truth!" If you're telling the truth, then you won't be burnt to death. The game rewards those who are on the right path.
As Aristotle grinned, he took out a silver Zippo lighter, flipped it in his hand in a complicated fashion, and then flipped it on. As he was about to light the firewood piled around Wang, a bright red light filled the entrance tunnel, followed by a wave of heat and smoke. A horse dashed out of the light and into the great hall. Its body was already on fire, and as it galloped, the wind whipped it into a ball of flames. The rider, a knight in heavy armor that glowed red from the heat, dragged a line of white smoke behind him.
The world has ended! The world has ended! Dehydrate! Dehydrate!
As the knight shouted, the animal under him fell down and turned into a bonfire. The knight was thrown some distance and rolled all the way to the stake, where he stopped moving. White smoke continued to pour out of openings in the armor. The sizzling grease from the dead man inside oozed out on the ground and caught fire, giving the armor a pair of burning wings. Everyone in the great hall streamed toward the entrance tunnel and squeezed into it, disappearing in the red light from outside. Wang Miao struggled with all his strength until he was freed from the ropes. He dodged the burning knight and horse, dashed through the empty great hall, and ran down the sweltering tunnel until he emerged outside. The ground glowed red like a piece of iron in a blacksmith's furnace. Bright rivulets of lava snaked across the dim red earth, forming a net of fire that stretched to the horizon. Countless thin pillars of flame erupted toward the sky. The dehydrators were burning. The dehydrated bodies inside gave the fire a strange, bluish glow. Not far from him, Wang saw a dozen or so small pillars of flame of the same color. These were the people who had just run out of the pyramid: the Pope, Galileo, Aristotle, and Leonardo. The fiery pillars around them were translucent blue, and he could see their faces and bodies slowly deforming in the flame. They focused their gazes on Wang, who had just emerged. Holding the same pose and lifting their arms toward the sky, they chanted in unison, "Tri-Solar Day!" Wang looked up and saw 3 gigantic suns slowly spinning around an invisible origin, like an immense 3-bladed fan blowing a deadly wind toward the world below. The 3 suns took up almost the entire sky, and as they drifted toward the west, half of the formation sank below the horizon. The giant fan continued to spin, a bright blade occasionally shooting above the horizon to give the dying world another brief sunrise and sunset. After a sunset, the ground glowed dim red, and the sunrise a moment later flooded everything with its glaring parallel rays. Once the 3 suns had completely set, the thick clouds that had formed from all the evaporated water still reflected their glow. The sky burned, displaying a hellish, maddening beauty. After the last light of destruction finally disappeared, and the clouds only glowed with a faint red luminescence reflected from the hellish fire on the ground, a few lines of giant text appeared. Civilization number 183 was destroyed by a tri-solar day. This civilization had advanced to the Middle Ages. After a long time, life and civilization will begin again, and progress once more through the unpredictable world of 3-body. But in this civilization, Copernicus successfully revealed the basic structure of the universe. The civilization of 3-body will take its first leap. The game has now entered the 2nd level. We invite you to log on to the 2nd level of 3-body. 16. The 3-body problem. ShuiJiao, who said it was urgent that he come down to Shi's office at the criminal division. Wang glanced at his watch. It was 3 in the morning. Wang arrived at Da Shi's chaotic office and saw that it was already filled with a dense cloud of cigarette smoke. A young woman police officer who shared the office fanned the smoke away from her nose with a notebook. Da Shi introduced her as Shu Bingbing, a computer specialist from the Information Security Division. The third person in the office surprised Wang. It was Cheng, the reclusive, mysterious husband of Shen Yufei from the frontiers of science. Wei's hair was a mess. He looked up at Wang, but seemed to have forgotten they had met.
I'm sorry to bother you, but at least it looks like you weren't asleep,
Da Shi said.
I have to deal with something that I haven't told the Battle Command Center yet, and I need your advice.
He turned to Cheng.
Tell them what you told me.
My life is in danger, Wei said, his face wooden.
Why don't you start from the beginning?
Fine, I will. Don't complain about me being long-winded. Actually, I've often thought about talking to someone lately. Wei turned to look at Shu Bingbing. Don't you need to take notes or something?
Not right now,
Da Shi said, not missing a beat.
You didn't have anyone to talk to before?
No, that's not it. I was too lazy to talk. I've always been lazy. Cheng's story. I've been lackadaisical since I was a kid. When I lived at boarding school, I never washed the dishes or made the bed. I never got excited about anything. Too lazy to study, too lazy to even play. I dawdled my way through the days without any clear goals. But I knew that I had some special talents others lacked. For example, if you drew a line, I could always draw another line that would divide it into the golden ratio, 1.618. My classmates told me that I should be a carpenter, but I thought it was more than that. A kind of intuition about numbers and shapes. But my math grades were just as bad as my grades in other classes. I was too lazy to bother showing my work. On tests, I just wrote out my guesses as answers. I got them right about 80 to 90% of the time, but I still got mediocre scores. When I was a second-year student in high school, a math teacher noticed me. Back then, many high school teachers had impressive academic credentials, because during the Cultural Revolution, many talented scholars ended up teaching in high schools. My teacher was like that. One day, he kept me after class. He wrote out a dozen or so numerical sequences on the blackboard and asked me to write out the summation formula for each. I wrote out the formulas for some of them almost instantaneously, and could tell at a glance that the rest of them were divergent. My teacher took out a book, The Collected Cases of Sherlock Holmes. He turned to one story, A Study in Scarlet, I think. There's a scene in it where Watson sees a plainly dressed messenger downstairs and points him out to Holmes. Holmes says, "Oh, you mean the retired sergeant of Marines?" Watson is amazed by how Holmes could deduce the man's history. But Holmes can't articulate his reasoning and has to think for a while to figure out his chain of deductions. It was based on the man's hand, his movements, and so on. He tells Watson that there's nothing strange about this. Most people have difficulty explaining how they know 2 and 2 make 4. My teacher closed the book and said to me, "You're just like that. Your derivation is so fast and instinctive that you can't even tell how you got the answer." Then he asked me, "When you see a string of numbers, what do you feel?" "I'm talking about feelings." I said, "Any combination of numbers appears to me as a 3-dimensional shape. Of course, I can't describe the shapes of numbers, but they really do appear as shapes." "Then what about when you see geometric figures?" the teacher asked. I said, "It is just the opposite. In my mind, there are no geometric figures. Everything turns into numbers. It's just like if you get really close to a picture in the newspaper and everything turns into little dots." The teacher said, "You really have a natural gift for math, but he added a few more buts, pacing back and forth as though I was a difficult problem that he didn't know how to handle. But people like you don't cherish your gift. After thinking for a while, he seemed to give up, saying, "Why don't you sign up for the district math competition next month? I'm not going to tutor you and just be wasting my time with your sort. But when you give your answers, make sure to write out your derivations." So, I went to the competition. From the district level up through the International Mathematics Olympiad in Budapest. I won first place each time. After I got back, I was accepted by a top college's math program without having to go through the entrance examination. You're not bored by my talking all this time? Good. Well, to make sense of what happened later, I have to tell you all this. That high school math teacher was right. I didn't cherish my talent. Bachelor's, master's, PhD. I never put much effort into any of them. But I did manage to get through them all. However, once I graduated and went back to the real world, I realized that I was completely useless. Other than math, I knew nothing. I was half asleep when it came to the complexities of relationships between people. The longer I worked, the worse my career. Eventually, I became a lecturer at a college, but I couldn't survive there either. I just couldn't take teaching seriously. I'd write on the blackboard, "easy to prove," and my students would still struggle for a long while. Later, when they began to eliminate the worst teachers, I was fired. By then, I was sick of everything. I packed a bag and went to a Buddhist temple deep in the mountains, somewhere in southern China. No, I didn't go to become a monk. Too lazy for that. I just wanted to find a truly peaceful place to live for a while. The abbot there was my father's old friend, very intellectual, but became a monk in his old age. The way my father told it, at his level, this was about the only way out. The abbot asked me to stay. I told him I want to find a peaceful, easy way to just muddle through the rest of my life. The abbot said, "This place isn't really peaceful. There are a lot of tourists, and many pilgrims too. The truly peaceful can find peace in a bustling city, and to attain that state, you need to empty yourself." I said, "I'm empty enough. Fame and fortune are nothing to me. Many of the monks in this temple are worldlier than me." The abbot shook his head and said, "No, emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is a type of existence. You must use this existential emptiness to fill yourself." His words were very enlightening to me. Later, after I thought about it a bit, I realized that it wasn't Buddhist philosophy at all, but was more akin to some modern physics theories. The abbot also told me he wasn't going to discuss Buddhism with me. His reason was the same as my high school teachers. With my sort, he'd just be wasting his time. That first night, I couldn't sleep in the tiny room in the temple. I didn't realize that this refuge from the world would be so uncomfortable. My blanket and sheet both became damp in the mountain fog, and the bed was so hard. In order to make myself sleep, I tried to follow the abbot's advice and fill myself with emptiness. In my mind, the first emptiness I created was the infinity of space. There was nothing in it, not even light. But soon I knew that this empty universe could not make me feel peace. Instead, it filled me with a nameless anxiety, like a drowning man wanting to grab onto anything at hand. So I created a sphere in this infinite space for myself. Not too big, though possessing mass. My mental state didn't improve, however. The sphere floated in the middle of emptiness. In infinite space, anywhere could be the middle. The universe had nothing that could act on it, and it could act on nothing. It hung there, never moving, never changing, like a perfect interpretation for death. I created a second sphere whose mass was equal to the first one's. Both had perfectly reflective surfaces. They reflected each other's images, displaying the only existence in the universe other than itself. But the situation didn't improve much. If the spheres had no initial movement, that is, if I didn't push them at first, they would be quickly pulled together by their own gravitational attraction. Then the two spheres would stay together and hang there without moving. a symbol for death. If they did have initial movement and didn't collide, then they would revolve around each other under the influence of gravity. No matter what the initial conditions, the revolutions would eventually stabilize and become unchanging. The dance of death. I then introduced a third sphere, and to my astonishment, the situation changed completely. Like I said, any geometric figure turns into numbers in the depths of my mind. The sphereless one-sphere and two-sphere universes all showed up as a single equation, or a few equations, like a few lonesome leaves in late fall. But this third sphere gave emptiness life. The three spheres, given initial movements, went through complex, seemingly never-repeating movements. The descriptive equations rained down in a thunderstorm without end. Just like that, I fell asleep. The three spheres continued to dance in my dream, a patternless, never-repeating dance. Yet, in the depths of my mind, the dance did possess a rhythm. It was just that its period of repetition was infinitely long. This mesmerized me. I wanted to describe the whole period, or at least a part of it. The next day I kept on thinking about the three spheres dancing in emptiness. My attention had never been so completely engaged. It got to the point where one of the monks asked the abbot whether I was having mental health issues. The abbot laughed and said, "Don't worry, he has found emptiness." Yes, I had found emptiness. Now I could be at peace in a bustling city. Even in the midst of a noisy crowd, my heart would be completely tranquil. For the first time, I enjoyed math. I felt like a libertine who's always fluttered carelessly from one woman to another, suddenly finding himself in love. The physics principles behind the three-body problem are very simple. It's mainly a math problem.
Didn't you know about Henri Poincaré?
Wang Miao interrupted Wei to ask. At the time, I didn't. Yes, I know that someone studying math should know about a master like Poincaré, but...
That's the time for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or requests, let me know.